Hello, folks. I know I did a show earlier, but I'm back again. I just thought would tell you something about an experience that happened to me a few years ago. We did our Great Escape first show of the week earlier with Jonathan Vance, and it was kind of cool. And we talked about the film. Now, years ago, I ran a little magazine for living historians in Britain, and I had the opportunity to interview one of the unsung stars of The Great Escape, the film. And his name was Laurence Montane. And if you don't know that name immediately, it's because, well, he's not one of the global stars. This is him. This is Laurence Montane there on the left. And that's him as he was as an elderly man. He died in 2017. And he played the character of Haynes, who was involved in diversions. He's the one who has a fight with James Coburn to cover up when they're jumping in the truck with the branches. You see him there in the movie when they're preparing the exit to the entrance to the tunnel there. He's in the background there behind James Coburn. And this is a photo he signed for me, along with John Layton signed it for me, and Charles Bronson signed it for me. I had several copies, and I sent it to various people, and I would have sent it to James Coburn to get his signature if I had, James Coburn ended up dying, and I couldn't send it to James Coburn. And tomorrow, by the way, we have the son of this gentleman. This is Wally Floody, who was one of the original escapers back in 1944, and his son Brian is joining us on the family show tomorrow. Anyway, Laurence Montane was one of the many actors who was in the support roles of The Great Escape. And John Sturges, the director, always said that what set his films apart was not the lead actors, it was always the supporting artists. If you think about his movies like The Magnificent Seven and Eagle Has Landed, he always has a good kind of middle rank of stars. And Laurence Montane was one of the guys who ended up in The Great Escape. Now, years later, Laurence Montane was in a Disney film called Escape to Witch Mountain from 1976. Now, rather forgettable live action is Disney movie. Anyway, on that movie was a stuntman called Bud Ekins. Now, Bud, or Ekins, was the stunt performer who famously leapt over the fence in Steve McQueen at the end of The Great Escape. Anyway, Bud was on the film as a stuntman. He said to Laurence Montane, he said, I'm quoting, I'm reading now, he said, you know, if they left all the scenes you had in the film, you'd be where Bronson and Coburn are today, talking about Great Escape. And said that all of Lawrence's best stuff ended up on the cutting room floor because with the movie, and it's 2.5 hours long, I guess they had a lot more footage. And it didn't make the final cut. Anyway, long story short, and apologies for rambling, I have had a bit of Gentleman Jack Daniels there, and I will continue to drink while I'm doing this. Anyway, I interviewed Laurence Montane, who played Haynes, by email. In fact, we did speak on the telephone once briefly to confirm that I had the right email address. And he became famous for a couple of roles in Star Trek. I'm not a Trekkie, but he was in Star Trek a couple of times. Anyway, I interviewed him about his role in The Great Escape, and what a fascinating guy he was. He was a dancer by trade, but also he was a champion fencer. He also spoke multiple languages, English, Italian, French, German. And he did a lot of work in the late 50s doing voices, dubbing voices of other actors in Hollywood movies. Anyway, he was knocking about in Europe, and The Great Escape was filmed in Europe, and Laurence Montane ended up in the film as Haynes. And so basically, I'm sharing with you. Oh, and by the way, he'd been in the US Marine Corps as a young guy. He'd been a ballet dancer. He'd worked on a kibbutz in Israel for a few years. He worked on the oil lines around the world. He had an incredible career before he became an actor, and never really as an actor became a huge star. Anyway, I'm just going to run through a few things. Basically, I'm going to read you what I asked him in the email and read you his responses. And we kept in touch via email for a few years. And anyway, so my first question to him was, Laurence, correct me if I'm wrong, but the interiors of the film were filmed in Munich, and that's where they made the underground part of the tunnel, blah, 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 and also the interiors of the huts and what have you. And he said, he responded, yes, we shot in a sound studio in Munich, and we shot in different locations. And I asked him how long the section of tunnel was they filmed in. And he said it ran the length of a soundstage, so about 75 feet. So it was above ground. And when you see them in the film, there's James Coburn taking his suitcase in. That's in one studio. And they disappear into a hole, and they just kind of waited under the floor. And then the tunnel set is a separate set, the other side of the studio. Then they filmed all the bits of Charles Bronson going back and forth through the tunnel. And I asked him about the set where he's captured. He is captured along with Nigel Stock, who played Cavendish. And they're in that kind of Gestapo headquarters with the kind of the arches. If you remember the film, go and watch the film. You remember the scene. And I said, was that a real place or was that a set? And he said, it was most definitely a set. He said, the fact it looked so realistic is just because they put a lot of work into it. The German craftsmen working on the set put a lot of effort. That is a set again. And my next question was, in the movie, it's suggested that Laurence Montane, his best buddy in the camp is Nimmo, played by Tom Adams. Now, Tom Adams is in the photo there. He's the guy in the battle dress. He's a British actor, quite big in the 60s. He played a spy in some kind of a James Bond ripoff, and he died a few years. And he was also in those adverts for the Barrett houses or something back in the 90s. Those of you British remember that. And I said to, you see them together. There they are in that shot. They're sitting next to each other. We know that Willie, John Layton, and Charles Bronson, Danny are friends. We know that Angus Lenny, Ives, the Mole, and Steve McQueen are buddies. And the suggestion was these two, Laurence Montane and Tom Adams, were to be friends with us. So I asked him about that. He said yes. He said, as in the development of the script, he and Tom were supposed to be a twosome and be kind of best buddies. But as the film progressed, the concept was never developed. And of course, I escaped and Tom never did. And I talked to him about the fact the script was being kind of rewritten all the time on set because they're famously trying to find more things for Steve McQueen to do and so on and so forth. And I hope I'm not rambling too much about nonsense. But obviously, as McQueen's role gets built up and up and up to end up with the motorcycle chase, the other characters, kind of their roles kind of get squished down a bit. And I asked him where there was a feeling among the supporting cast: Tom Adams, William Russell, who played Soren in Security, Robert Desmond, who played the tailor. And did they kind of feel they were being pushed out of the way as Steve McQueen's role got exaggerated? And he said, no. He said, we all got on very well on set. He said, in the beginning, the Brits stayed among themselves, as did the Germans and the Americans. But we were in that camp for 4 months, he said, before moving on to location. So it was natural that the barriers were dropped after a few days. Unlike most films, the assistant director did not let us stay at home when we were not scheduled to shoot, meaning they were always on set, which is not always the case in movies. Sometimes on a movie, only the actors who are going to be in the key scenes are on set. But Laurence Montane was clear that during the making of it, all the actors are always on set all the time, in case they need any background roles or walking past and what have you. And that I guess establishes that kind of esprit de corps as well, which is kind of neat. Anyway, so I'm going to carry on talking about that. And he said that's why you see us in a background where even though we don't have any lines, we're always there going back and forth. And I asked him whether he as member of the cast got on with the German actors. And he said he got on very well with Hans Mesmer, who played the commandant. Again, because Laurence spoke German, and some of the German actors, their English wasn't really that good. They learned their lines in English, but they couldn't kind of have proper conversations in English. But Laurence, being able to speak German, could socialize with those guys. And so he spoke to Hans Mesmer quite a lot. I then asked him if the camp was built with 4 sides, whether it was like some movie sets, just like 2 sections. And he said it was complete with 4 fenced sides, complete huts, and it was built in a forest, and they were filmed barbed wire all around it, so they could film whatever angle they wanted because they could move around with the sunlight, the lighting, and so there was a full camp made, and they could operate within it, and it gave John Sturdy, the director, license to film what they wanted. And I also, changing the subject, I did interview Angus Lenny, who played Ives, by letter as well. So I drop in a couple of questions. I asked Laurence Montane things I'd asked Angus Lenny, and I said, when they started on the film, did they know in advance whether their characters were going to survive or not? Angus Lenny playing Ives, obviously he's running for the fence as an integral part of the plot. So he I guess he knew he was going to die. And I asked Laurence that, and Laurence said 1 week into shooting, Steve McQueen decided he didn't like his role in the script, and we shut down for a week while a writer came in from California to rectify his grievance. At that time, I had signed a contract for only 5 weeks, since in the original script, I didn't escape. But when the revisions came down, much to my surprise, I got out of the camp as a German soldier, probably because I spoke the language, and eventually I ran 19 weeks on the shoot. I then go on to talk about an interview with James Coburn, because James Coburn, who played Sedgwick, famously said well, I say famously, it's famous to me because I'm a movie freak. He said in an interview that he went to one of the reunions of some of the Great Escapers at some point and was given a tie with little strands of barbed wire across it that some of the escapers actually had. And I asked Laurence Montane, did he get to meet any of the real Great Escapers and go to any of the meetings? And his answer was, he said, no, and if that's the case, someone owes me a frigging tie and a frigging dinner, he said. So he didn't get to meet the escapers. I asked him about the weather. Did they shoot indoor or outdoor scenes first? He said we jumped around with the weather. Nice days we worked outdoors, and when it clouded over, they went indoors. So the set, the inside set, the studios are very close to the external sets. So I could go back and forth between the two. And he says, as I said before, while in the camp, we were required to be on the set every day. When we moved to Fussen, which while the towns they use, what the exteriors after the escapes, they use it with the river and the cafe and James Coburn, blah, blah, blah. He said, I was with Dickie Attenborough the very morning they shot the motorcycle jump. So he was there with Attenborough watching Steve McQueen doing the jump with Bud Ekins, who he then met 14 years later on this Disney film. I asked him if he ever played any Germans again, and he did play a German once in Hogan's Heroes. If you've watched any of that series, he played a German once in that, and he was also an Italian officer in the war film Tobruk, but he didn't really kind of do much in war movies. Although he did know Judd Taylor, who played Goff, the other American with Steve McQueen, because they had been in a Broadway play together in Mr. Roberts back in Hollywood in 1951. So he knew him. And I said, did you have any idea making The Great Escape that it was going to be a film that was going to be repeated ad infinitum ever and ever and ever and become so popular around the world? He said, no idea at all. He said, I was just happy to be working, he said, with so many great actors. I said, any other particular memories, anecdotes, or funny stories from filming? He said, yeah, but I doubt that you're going to live long enough for me to tell you them all. He said, the experience of doing The Great Escape was a once-in-a-lifetime experience for an actor. I'll just change a photo to a different one. There he is having a fight with Sedgwick there. He said, I've always said that every actor should have a great escape in their resume. Sturges was a cinematic master. I learned much from him. Gene Ruggiero was the editor, and although he cut out some of my very best scenes, he made that film tick. Bernstein's music was masterful, and what can I say about the acting? You're right, the secondary parts were as important as the principals, and there wasn't a lapse or dull moment in the entire 3 hours. So we come to the claim that Bud Ekins made about the scenes that were cut from the film that might have made Laurence Montane a star had they not been cut. So this is what he said. He said, so now to the part about what was cut from the film. He said, I had 3 distinct scenes that were filmed that never appeared in the final cut. The first one occurred just after I had the fight scene with Coburn over the jacket. So you can see that. And so Willie and Valinsky can jump in the wagons of branches. And he was going to try and escape too with the Russian prisoners. Robert Relia, the associate producer, was directing that particular scene. I was supposed to walk along the compound looking for a way to get out when I see the 2 Roys, Jensen and Sickner, 2 of the best stunt men out of Hollywood, standing by the side of the building. Jensen has a cane. As I approach, I nod the 2 Roys, and Jensen hands the other end of the cane to Sickner. I take a running leap, jump onto the cane, and they catapult me up into the air, up onto the roof, and then I can jump into a wagon. And Laurence, I guess, having been a fencer and a sportsman and a ballet dancer, was incredibly agile. He was 30 when I think he made the movie, so he was kind of young and fit. Anyway, he said we did take after take of trying to jump on this cane, then flicking him upwards, him landing on the roof, and I didn't make it. He said we tried numerous times. He said there was a question of a stuntman actually doing the role for him. He said, no, I can do it. And anyway, he said, the Roys and I rehearsed the action maybe 20 or 30 times because the timing had to be flawless. But he didn't realize that it was the balance, getting the balance of they lift the cane, he jumps upwards. He said the balance was really difficult. And he said every time he went up, he either hit the overhang of the roof and fell off, or he missed the roof, or he went over the roof and came down the other side, or he didn't go airborne, just landed on the ground. Anyway, it didn't work. So that way, in the end, they just gave up filming that sequence. So that would have shown Laurence Montane jumping on the roof and then maybe jumping, escaping from the Anyway, that was the first scene. So the second scene is sometime after the escape. He said, there's a scene in which I'm being pursued and I take refuge under a bridge. I don't remember how the Germans came to chase me when I was in a German uniform. Whatever, he said. I take off my helmet and begin to burn my papers in order not to be captured as a spy. Then there appears a couple of German soldiers at the far end of the tunnel. I make a run for it, and as I clear the mouth of the tunnel, Roy Jensen, the same stuntman from earlier, this time dressed in a German uniform, takes a flying leap from the top of the bridge, and just as he's about to land on me, I turn and throw a punch, and he collapses to the ground as the other soldiers capture me. He says, okay, so you've got the picture. And again, it is a stunt that takes perfect timing, because if I don't throw the punch at just the right moment with Roy airborne, the whole stunt goes down the shitter. Now, you've got to know that Roy is wearing a vest under his uniform. A wire is attached to the vest, and the other end of the wire is tied off a bumper of a car. When Roy reaches the end of the wire, when he is airborne, he drops like a sack of horse shit. Theoretically, this stunt, then I leap through, I punch him, and he leaps through the air. Now, theoretically, this stunt should have looked spectacular, and we did it a number of times until Roy could barely walk with all the trauma to his person. I never saw the outtakes, he said, but the scene never appeared in the film. You never do know how I get captured, except you see me in the cell with Cavendish later. And he said, now, that scene in the cell was quite a longer scene when he filmed it, when he breaks down and cries about what's going to happen to us, and he wonders about whether they're going to be shot. He said, I did a good performance. It was a good scene, and I'm really sorry, he said, that didn't make the final cut. So he says, as you see, I really had quite an active role in the film, but it never made it to the screen. At first, I was greatly disappointed, but when one considers that the first cut of the film ran some 8 hours, it is easy to see that something had to go. And naturally, John Sturge is not going to cut any of the Steve McQueen or James Garner scenes. They are the meat and potatoes of the film. So much of the stuff that was shot of me did not make it in the final cut. C'est la vie. Good God, Paul, you've got me talking about things that happened 40 years ago. This shows you it would have been about 2003. So, yeah, we're talking nearly 20 years ago, I interviewed Laurence. And he said, well, I hope this gives you an idea of what it was like working on such a great project. I hear stories all the time about actors who claim that they were left on the cutting room floor. And I always say, yeah, sure. And here I am telling you the same thing. He says, take it for what it was worth. I don't have any bad feelings about not becoming a star. I can tell you one thing. I had a ball working on The Great Escape and the other films I did, and I wouldn't train it for all the money in the world. So there you are. This is just a little extra snippet of information about a guy who could have become a big star but didn't. And I just thought I'd share that with you in case any of you care about that, because I was always a fan of the movie. And I say over the years, I got to interview Angus Lenny, who played Ives by letter. I shared some letters with John Layton, who played Willie the Tunnel King, and I interviewed Laurence Montane. I was trying to line up an interview with James Coburn, but he ended up dying on me, which was unfortunate because I always found this movie interesting. Anyway, there you are. I hope next time you watch that film, which may even be tomorrow, who knows, you'll pay attention to the scenes with Laurence Montane and just perhaps it'll only be the first time you kind of notice him in it. He plays a Canadian. He was American by birth. And maybe you'll see him in some other films as well. He became very known at the end, towards the end of his life, going on the Star Trek circuits where he'd sign autographs, things like that. And then, he was still very fit up until his 80s, and then eventually, he died in 2017. So there you are. A little story about Laurence Montane, an actor who played Haynes in The Great Escape, but in the end didn't become a huge star. And it is interesting when you think about movies, how some people have that incredible screen presence and some don't. Nick Short, who watches some of my stuff, watched Never So Few, the John Sturges film from 1959 that had Frank Sinatra, Peter Lawford, Richard Johnson, and Steve McQueen got the role of Ringo, who ends up becoming an integral part of Frank Sinatra's OSS squad in Burma. And you can see when you watch Never So Few Now, which is pretty poor. The romance scenes with Gina Lollobrigida are pretty awful. The action in Burma is all right when they're on location, but a lot of it's very studio bound. But the point is, you can see Steve McQueen's charisma just kind of pouring off the screen there. Hence why I got The Magnificent Seven. Hence why I got The Great Escape. And so the only director who used Steve McQueen 3 times. Was John Sturges. So yeah, Laurence Montane, what a shame in many ways that he never got to be a bigger star, because incredible character, had done a lot of stuff in Hollywood, but as he said, he had a good career. And if you're an actor and you're working and you work for a long time, I know a number of actors, if you're getting steady work as an actor, you're kind of not doing anything too badly. But there you are, Laurence Montane, who played Haynes. And maybe one day I'll show you some of the stuff Angus Lenny told me, who played Ives, who also played the cook, Shuggy, in Crossroads years later. He was also the co-pilot to Cliff Robertson's 633 Squadron. Angus Lenny was a fascinating guy. He ended up sending me his final copy of the premiere program. Well, he didn't give me the whole, but he tore out the page of his fat character, Ives, and he signed it to me, which I've also got on display somewhere. And he said, that's the last copy I have of that. This was, again, about the same time, early 2000s. But there you are. I do hope you're enjoying Great Escape Week on World War II TV. And I apologize for my slightly red nose. I have had a couple of bevies, but I didn't know how I'd be able to fit those stories into the Great Escape film show at the end of the week, because I've been rambling for whatever it's been, 20 minutes now, and I would never be able to fit all that story into that show, because we've got Matthew Moss and Robbie Maguire and Merrin Walters coming on talking about the movie. And if I rambled on about the emails I exchanged with Laurence Montane, it would have cut into the purpose of the show, which is discuss the movie. But there you are, the star that never became, because his scenes were cut. And there you are. I thought you'd enjoy it. So there you are. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. I will see you all again tomorrow. And I'm going to go to bed soon because it's nearly midnight. Cheers, everybody. Thanks for watching. Bye.